The ninth item needing consideration today is consider adopting 4 resolutions related to the fiscal year 2025 Mesa County budget. Number 1, a resolution summarizing expenditures and revenues for each fund and adopting the 2025 budget. Number 2, a resolution appropriating sums of money for the calendar year 2025. Number 3, a resolution levying general property taxes for the year 2024. And number 4, a resolution to adopt authorized staffing levels for the year 2025. We do have Pete here today, and we also have Diane here to present as well for budget hearing.
Good morning. Pete Bear, Mesa County Administrator. And Diane, do you want to introduce yourself?
Diane Jutkowski, County Budget Manager.
So before you this morning is our annual budget that we get to present. What we will do is we will start with just kind of a narrative around the budget, and then Diane will go deeply into our actual numbers that the budget is looking at. Couple themes I'll mention. It was already touched on. Health insurance is a driver of our budget this year. It has continued to climb. We continue to see higher usage. The board's emphasis on law enforcement, in particular the sheriff's office, is now included in the budget, which is a great thing to see moving forward. And again, what I'm touching on are a few of the higher level changes from the proposed budget, which we had in October. And then a more robust capital plan, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what I'll do is, on the screen is the budget message, which is an official letter that goes through to DOLA and others, and also to our community to show them what we're doing. And these will all be online. So I know that some folks may not be able to hear us today, but we'll have all this information online. So the 2025 budget is of $272.6 million. I'll call it $273 million. About a 4.4% increase from the 2024 adopted budget. The net to the county, and when we say net, the 273 includes internal transfers between fleet and finance and insurance funds and such. The net budget is 232 million, rounding 231.7. It's balanced for the Colorado statutes, and it will be effective from January 1 through December 31st of 2025. I will say that we do have a very strong strategic plan. It is one that we have been using for a few years now under the leadership of the board. It is the best strategic plan in my career that I've ever seen, in all honesty. It is one that we use. We work it forward to, and this budget includes, and I'll touch a little more on in the PowerPoint, our strategic initiatives. Again, build the best team, build a culture of excellence, build community together, and build fiscal stability. All those are initiatives that were used within the budget. We'll talk a little bit more about building the best team and some of the compensation increases and changes in health insurance. As I said, that's a major driver of cost, and we are asking the employees to put in a little bit. It's not a huge amount, but it's a little bit more that we're asking the employees to pick up, in addition to the county picking up a lion's share of that. Culture of excellence. It was already mentioned that we're concentrating on the sheriff's department. We'll talk about the new deputies, 18 new deputies there. Continued working again in law enforcement with district attorney's office with 2 additional folks there. 2 people in facilities and parks, so that'll come out of the Conservation Trust Fund. And again, we'll talk a little bit about the funding sources. 3 positions in our Department of Human Services, which are grant funded, and 2 in Public Works, which are conversions, and 1 in, of our TPO. Regional Transportation Planning Office, sorry. Again, under building community together, we're a significant increase in funding for public safety. And we're also working hard on renovating the Mesa County Justice Center and making sure that we have plenty of room for our courts and judges and the DA and our public defenders and folks to work through there. So a little bit under the economic and revenue outlook. As we're all aware, nationwide COVID hit, and there were a lot of changes to our economic picture nationwide. There was a lot of money that was handed out and printed, and we are all coming off of that issue and working through it, and I've seen this as a theme across all the counties and my counterparts in the state. There were money and programs built. Those programs and money now need to be evaluated very heartily because we're getting back to what I would call a normal budget component, where we look at the key structures of a county and what it is we want to provide to our community and what it is we need to provide to our community and how those fit into our budget cycle. So you will see some changes moving through as we, again, they printed a lot of money and we're all coming off of not having that money available and working back towards our core principles. So overall, we're doing okay. There was another report this morning on our sales tax that we are up slightly from last year, which we continue to see, which is a good component of our budget to see. And our property tax, we'll talk a little bit more about that. We work hard with the assessor. We did see a little bit of a decrease, mainly oil and gas component of that, and we'll talk a little bit more on that. This budget does include the funding for the Tabor refund, which was just recently announced. It's 11 million, a little over 11, we'll call it 11.5 million rounding refund that is included in the budget. That equates to about $100 per registered voter in Mesa County, and my understanding those checks will start to go out next week. So again, a reminder on the budget, we have 30 different funds. Counties are very interesting creatures in that sense. 31 different departments and numerous 7+ elected officials that are provided service through the budget. We also talk a little bit more about the CIP, our capital improvement plan. Again, I touched briefly on our Justice Center. There's also some road work and some other components that we'll touch on that make up a large part of our capital plan. The capital plan is roughly 49 million. A lot of that majority of that is sales tax that comes in from the voters who passed the initiative in 1981. Briefly mentioned, 28%, 28 and a quarter. I love how we always have split people, FTEs. And that's about a 2% increase in the sense of that we're about 1,250 plus employees at this point in time. So this budget, just in conclusion, the strategic plan is used as a driver. We'll do our strategic initiatives and make sure those are funded properly. It emphasizes on public safety. We have some cost drivers in the sense of health insurance and a couple other components that we'll touch on. And this budget overall, though, is balanced. It meets the criteria. And also would just like to say the budget review team is a process we put in place 4 or 5 years ago. That's our key stakeholders across all the departments come together under Diane's leadership, and we work through the requests that come through, and we try to emphasize again, in particular, the strategic importance of each department and what it is they're trying to accomplish for our community and how their budget goals meet and reflect that. So just a shout out to all those folks that spent a lot of time in helping on the budget review team. So with that, I think we'll go into the PowerPoint. And again, as I said, I'll just reemphasize again, all this information will be available. So I know that, again, there may be people who can't hear the audio, but we'll have it available. So, and again, we're presenting today, December 10th, the budget for the 2025 meets the criteria of having presented by December 15th is the statute. Myself and Diane are presenting it. I'll give a shout out to Diane. She just came last year, got thrown to the wolves, so to speak, and she has done an amazing job. She has picked this up. She's really serving the county very well in pushing this through. So again, we talked about the strategic plan, build the best team, and that's attracting and retaining our top talent, build a culture of excellence, staffing and technology that streamlines services. I've seen a lot of changes here, and we'll talk a little bit about Workday and some of our other components and software. I've seen a lot of efficiency driven by the board over the last couple of years and continue to see that moving forward. So that's a great thing to see. Build community together. public health and safety and creating spaces to work. We've emphasized over the last few years a number of capital projects. Our Clifton campus comes to mind and some of our other components. This budget reflects the ability to run those components that we built and make sure that we have adequate service in those areas. And build fiscal stability. I will say there are a few more challenges that we've seen in the past, mainly because, again, as I said, the COVID dollars, which were out there, we're now starting to emphasize back to our standard processes and the key core elements of a government function. So to talk about some of the key components there, there's, in this budget is $4.4 million proposed for increase in total compensation. That's split among all the funds we talked about. About half of that is general fund, and the rest of that is spread throughout such as our road and bridge fund, our solid waste management fund, and other components. We're asking the employees to do a 10% increase in health insurance. That sounds like a lot, but it's not really a single individual. That's about $4 a month in addition that we're asking for. And that's just a theme of our usage and our health insurance costs continue to go up, as we saw it earlier with the sheriff's thing. So, under the board's guidance, there are 18 new FTEs in here for the sheriff's office for a safer community and to allow them to continue to provide top-notch service to our community and throughout. There's 11 more FTEs for the rest of the county, and we'll talk a little bit about where the funding comes from those. A lot of those are funded through either a grant or a fund that we have that is not part of the general fund. There's $1.3 million in addition to the 18 FTEs for public safety that are other needs for the sheriff's office and such. Again, as I mentioned, the Justice Center is a key component driver of our capital plan. We did receive a small grant to help start designing. We're working with a grant provider on that to make sure that the criteria meets our criteria and what we're after for that. I mentioned Workday. The budget does include another $1 million which was in all along in our plan. This just shows it in this one. I really believe that's going to be a structurally sound piece of software, and I also believe the transparency that's going to allow for the community is much greater than we've ever had before. In the past, we've had numerous smaller components of software here and there in other departments. Now it'll all be under one central software, and it also has a front-facing component to it that will be transparent, and I also believe it will provide the board a lot better information dashboard, so to speak, so that you can look and see on the budget what's going on there. So really excited to see that coming into play. I think it's a lot of work. I'll give a shout out to all our employees who have been working tremendously hard at both their existing job and making sure Workday implements across the entire county. Again, with $272 million and 30 plus funds, you can imagine the amount of work that takes to get through there. This also includes, we moved forward last year with an energy efficient program. This includes savings from that. We're already budgeting that $0.6 million, 600,000 savings from that program, which keeps us on track with the guarantee that we were expected to see from that program and implementation of that. So with that, I will let Diane start to talk the actual numbers unless there's some questions on just kind of the general budget thing. And I'd be happy to talk to them now or at the end.
All right, so as Pete mentioned, we had quite a few changes from the proposed budget to this adopted budget, and most of those happened or had the biggest impact in the general fund, so I'm really gonna wait to touch on those a little bit later when we get to the general fund. But here I have a high-level roll-up of all Mesa County funds and what the budget looks like for 2025 versus 2024 adopted. We are looking at $249.9 million in total revenues. This is a $9.2 million increase versus last year, which equates to about a 3.8% change in total revenues. The two main drivers here in our revenues are going to be our two main revenue sources, sales tax and property taxes. As Pete mentioned, we use current year collections for sales taxes to sort of project out what we're expecting our collections to be in 2025. And so that 2% average growth factor is kind of what we're using for these projections in 2025.
Diane,
For-
real quick. Will you do this for the general fund too?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So for property taxes, Pete had mentioned we do anticipate less collections for property taxes than we were projecting in the proposed budget. A big part of that is going to be due to a decrease in assessed values due to the oil and gas value. But in total, we're looking at a 9.2 million increase year over year. Some of that is also attributable to additional grant funding that our departments are bringing in. For expenditures, we are expecting $272.6 million in 2025, which is an $11.5 million increase versus 2024, which equates to a 4.4% change in total expenses year over year. Two of the big cost drivers for our increase in expenses is going to be the increase in compensation, as Pete mentioned. About $4.4 million was added to the budget to provide merit increases to our employees who provide our services to the community. And in addition, our health insurance costs were significantly higher than we had projected in the proposed budget. And so we're expecting that to be more of an impact to the 2025 budget as well. I did want to point out the changes in fund balance that you see here. The deficit of about 20 million. The real driver behind this lies in our capital fund, and that's due to those large construction projects that we have that run across a couple different years. And we go through a process in our in Q1 of 2025 where we're going to roll over about 20 to 25 million in committed contracts for those construction projects. And so that's kind of why you're seeing this large drawdown of fund balance in every year, and that's due to the capital fund.
Is that because we can't estimate what we're going to spend here at the end of the year?
Right, it is kind of hard. We have had a lot of changes in the capital fund from the proposed to the adopted as well, just as we're anticipating what projects are going to be completed in 2024, which ones are going to roll over into 2025, and trying to predict exactly how much is going to be committed to those contracts to roll over to 2025. And so here I have for you the All Mesa County Funds budget, the net figures. And as Pete mentioned, we like to pull out those transfers and charges between departments for internal services to kind of give you a better look at what the budget looks like. For revenues, we're looking at $207.5 million, a $5.2 million increase, 2.6% change in total revenues. And again, the driver behind that is going to be those same large revenue sources, property and sales taxes, so not much change there. $231.7 million for expenditures in 2025. You can see the deficit is much larger in 2025 versus 2024. And I did want to point out that the reason for that is this energy performance project that we have in 2024. We receive financing for that, which is sitting in fund balance, and we're actually transferring that to our capital fund in 2025 to then pay for about $9.2 million in construction expenditures. And this net view of the budget, it doesn't include that revenue transfer out of fund balance, but it does include the expenditure for the construction. So that's kind of why you're seeing the difference there year over year.
It just seems, I understand why we have to, it just seems clunky to have to show such a deficit this year because we're not transferring the revenue to next year yet. Mm-hmm. Is there any better way to do that? Because when you look at it, like a $24 million deficit.
It's technically being transferred next year, but you're seeing the deficit because this view of the budget is removing any of those interfund transfers. And so technically the financing is sitting in our TELP COF fund. And so you kind of miss out on that. In this view, you miss out on that transfer of that financing.
What I might suggest that we can definitely put a commentary on this slide as we put it out online so folks can look to see that because of that energy efficient program, and again, having a loan that is paying itself back and is guaranteed, that it does reflect differently than we've seen in the past, because that's the first time we've had anything like that. So, but we can definitely put a little commentary to this as we put it outside.
Okay, so moving on to the general fund, the 2025 budget, we are looking at revenues of $91.9 million. This is an increase of $3.9 million versus 2024, and a 4.4% change in total revenue. And again, as I mentioned, the expected revenue from property taxes did decrease quite a bit once we received those final certification of values. A big driving factor of that is the decrease in value for those oil properties. And we are also bound by Tabor, and so as things like inflation went down, that also decreases the amount of allowable growth of our property taxes. So less revenue coming from property taxes than we expected in the proposed budget. And as I mentioned, also the general fund includes that 2% growth factor for sales tax revenues. Most of the changes you're going to see happen on the expenditure side of the general fund. We are looking at $100 million, an $8.9 million increase versus 2024, which is about a 9.8% change year over year. And as Pete mentioned, the health insurance premiums were really a large hit to the general fund, mostly because about half of our employees reside inside of the general fund. And so when we saw those increases to health insurance premiums, about half of the increase was in the general fund. And I guess a little bit of background for the health insurance premiums. We are a self-funded entity and up to a certain point. So when our claims reach a certain level, we have additional insurance above that. And in 2023, we had really high usage of our health insurance, very high claims, and we actually hit that sort of stop loss, that high claim amount. And so when we went out to market in 2024 for the additional insurance, our risk increased because of the high claims that we've been seeing. And so that's the main driver behind those high premiums that we received. And we also anticipate very high usage year to date in 2024. So it's potential to see this sort of increase going into next year as well when we do the budget process. So we are looking into some cost saving measures that we can start doing in 2025 to hopefully mitigate some of these costs of health insurance premiums that we're going to start seeing. Another change to expenditures, the board decided to grant an additional 15 FTEs to the sheriff's office. So now we're giving them 18 total new deputies. And they also are receiving $1.3 million in additional funding for operating expenses. And that's going towards supporting those FTEs and other operating costs like new technologies, training, etc. And I did want to call out the fund balance on this slide as well. In 2024, we were expecting an ending fund balance of $20.2 million. And now for beginning of 2025, we're looking at $24.1 million. And so the difference that you're seeing there is partially due to revenues in 2024 coming in higher than anticipated and expenditures coming in lower than budget. And then we also had some relief in the use of federal revenue replacement funds to sort of offset some of the general fund expenditures in 2024. And so that allowed us to retain a larger fund balance starting in 2025. And with the 2025 budget, we are looking to end the year at about $16 million, which is equates to about 2 months worth of expenditures in the general fund. Here is a look at what our 2025 authorized staffing level is going to be. I kind of broke out all the departments here that are seeing a change and then lumped everything else together in the bottom line for you. I'm just going to step through each of these line by line and kind of give you some insights on what the positions are and what the funding source is for these as well. So we're seeing about a 2% increase in our staffing level, 28.25 FTEs. The majority of these are covered by additional funding, either in the form of state or federal grant funding or increased revenues that are being generated through county activities. Our Animal Services Department, we're actually moving the animal enforcement piece to our Sheriff's Department. So 4 of those FTEs are shifting from Animal Services to the Sheriff's Office for that animal enforcement. And then we're also removing 1 FTE from Animal Services. This was a loan that they had from our Criminal Justice Services Department. So we're just trying to align the FTE count with those loans as they move between departments. Our district attorney's office received state funding for 2 positions, a senior trial deputy DA and a senior investigator. And these positions are going to be dedicated for an auto theft prevention program. Our fairgrounds is adding 2 positions, one dedicated for the community center maintenance and as well as the fairgrounds maintenance. And these 2 positions are going to be covered through the conservation trust funding. Our Human Services Department is adding 3 workforce center positions. Those are fully funded through federal grants, 2 career development case managers, and 1 employment specialist. Public Health is adding a Family Connects program funded through state grants, and this is going to go towards 1 FTE nurse home visitor and a part-time 0.25 FTE program supervisor. Our engineering department is moving a wastewater technician who has been a temporary employee for some years to a full-time FTE now, so we're just reflecting that in the count here. Our stormwater division is adding a stormwater inspector, which is being covered by an increase in inspection revenues due to the increase in volume in inspections that they've had. Our RTPO department is adding 1 transportation planner, which is supported by a federal grant. And then our sheriff's office is adding 22 FTEs. As I mentioned, 4 of those are going to be dedicated to animal enforcement, and then 18 additional FTEs on top of that. And here are some of the large changes that we saw between the proposed and the adopted budget. Starting with the revenues, some of these I've already mentioned. Our property tax, the revenues that we were expecting to get from property tax decreased based on that final certification of values. Between the proposed and adopted budget, our departments were finalizing what funds they anticipated from both federal and state grants, and some of them saw an increase in those funds over the past 2 months. And so the federal revenues that you're seeing here is increase in federal revenue expected for our behavioral health department. The additional state revenues is the additional state funding that our DA received to support those 2 FTEs, as well as an increase in expected state funding for our Department of Human Services. We also had to finalize our revenues in our insurance fund. And again, this is related to the increase in health insurance. The health insurance premium increase, so we also see an increase in expenses related to like our employer contributions per employee. And those contributions, they have a reciprocal revenue in our insurance fund. And so as we have claims throughout the year, we pay for those claims out of our insurance fund. And so this is just aligning that revenue. And then we also finalized how we wanted to use the federal revenue replacement funds. We had originally expected to bring these in to the general fund as a revenue source, and rather we decided to keep them in the fund that they currently reside in, the Economic Development Fund, and we're just paying out of that fund to help offset some of the expenses that we're seeing, and you'll see that on this next slide. as we get to the changes in expenditures from the proposed budget. Here you can see the impact of the increase in health insurance premiums. We also increased the transfer from our behavioral health department to our MAC agencies. We have a certain amount of funding for our behavioral health department through the first half of the year. And so increasing this transfer is allowing us to support those agencies as well as use up that grant funding. The Sheriff Office was awarded those additional FTEs, so you can see the breakout here in that funding and the other funding that they receive for those other operating expenses as well. We added those two DA FTEs that are supported through state grant funding. We also increased the transfer amount to our public health department. This again is just to ensure that they have a balanced budget. And as our health insurance premiums increased, theirs did as well. And so this is sort of to go help cover some of that increase that they are seeing. We again had to finalize the claims amount within our insurance fund. This is just to align again with what our insurance company was quoting as our expected claims amount and to align it with the premiums and the revenue that we're expecting from those employer contributions. We finalized our capital improvement plan expenses. As I mentioned, we have a lot of changes between the proposed and adopted for this as we sort of finalize what projects we expect to end in 2024 and carry over into 2025. And then finally, you can see here, this is the use of those federal revenue replacement funds going to offset some of the expenses in our general fund in 2025. And then the increase for total funds, the $300,000, we actually use the increased transfer to our public health department. We use the federal revenue replacement funds for that. And here is just a high-level look at our capital improvement plan. We put together this plan for the upcoming year, 2025, and 5 additional out years. So a total of 6 years is included in this capital budget. And the reason for this is because the nature of those projects, they're multi-year, multi-phase, and so having a 6-year plan helps us better account for when certain projects are starting and ending, and it just makes for a better informed budgeting process. And so just a high-level look in 2025, $49.8 million in capital revenues, and sitting pretty even at $49.9 million in capital expenses in 2025. Of the $49.9 million revenues, we do have $4.7 million in grants and other project-specific revenues that we are expecting in 2025. And then I have just a little graphic here of some of the major projects that we are expecting to put funds toward in 2025. So as I mentioned, our energy performance project, about $9.2 million. We have some various road improvements in here, the Justice Center renovation. And again, you can see in there our new financial system that we're putting funds toward in 2025 as well. And then just a reminder, after the presentation today, we'll be putting the budget on Mesa County website. We'll have some of the schedules, so the schedules will be available today, and then we'll have sort of a more interactive budget explorer available close to the end of the week. And then in the early months of the year, we actually put together a more comprehensive budget book, and so once that's completed, that'll also be available to the public. And any questions on anything?
Thank you, Diane. Thanks, Pete. Commissioners, do you have comments or questions during this thing?
Just one quick question. Have you been able to calculate 2024's tabor revenue cap yet based on inflation and local growth?
I'm going to step in and protect our finance people by saying we do, but it changes considerably from where we calculate now. to the end of the year, because we still will be collecting revenues up through basically February that will count towards the 24 cap. So I'll give you, for instance, from the year before, about this time of year last year, they thought it would be about 7.5 million, and of course it ended up 11.4 million, which just meant the economy did a little better and we collect a little more. But trying to get an exact number at this point is a little bit hard to do. But at the same time, absolutely understand where you're coming from that, and finance will stay in touch with the board as we see that number starting to come to fruition, so we can look to see the refund that would be due in 2026, what that looks like. So I think if you're asking specifically for 2025, I think at this point we're not anticipating that the way we are cyclically, we have a big refund one year, hence this year, and the next year, the way it's working is we don't have that refund, and the year after we have it again. So I think at this point,
I think that's what our finance director is anticipating as well. Minimal refund, and then we would be seeing another large refund in the following year.
That's fine. I was more interested in the actual inflation rate and local growth rate, because we gotta calculate that first.
Cap, we should be able to calculate, we don't need to know what our revenue is, what's the cap?
Yeah, so again, it's really just the inflation and local growth. So this year inflation for these calculations in here, it was about 2.6%. And the local growth, after you added everything in, it was less than 1%. So that's why our collections are going to be a lot less than anticipated because of that small local growth. And inflation, obviously we don't know what's going to happen next year. I can anticipate it probably is going to be relatively flat. As far as assessed values, I can't really speak.
That's fine. I'm not asking you guys what to guess, so we get that information later. Thank you.
When we lowered our bill, how is that reflected in our projections?
That's what we get from the assessor. They take the mill and they look at the assessed value and they come up with a dollar figure that we put in for the property tax. And again, the one thing we did see is oil and gas property values went down, and some of that's also based on the product that they're bringing out. So if we see that come back more robust, which we've heard of some projects up in the area that will be good for next year, reflect it. But for this year, it's based on where we're currently at. So you want
so I guess we have a flat mill, and then based on what our revenue limit is, what we're allowed to collect, we offer a temporary tax credit which lowers that mill. So that's why you're seeing our mill is going to be, it normally sits at 12.162, and because of the revenue limit, it's going to be total mills 11.588.
Does anyone from the public have any comments or questions on these items? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board for further discussion.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. So seeing none further comments, I will entertain a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda as published.
So moved.
Except it's not on the consent, but
It's not consent.
taking that out,
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
second.
Sorry. Second individual as published. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries.